Hello and welcome to today's Mastering Life Shorts. Today we are going to be talking about biases and fallacies, those little tricks that our brains play on us that lead us to make poor decisions. My idea here is to highlight some of the common biases and fallacies that I come across when I'm coaching clients. And if you know about these things, these tricks that your brain plays with you, then you can spot yourself before you fall for them and avoid making poor decisions. So going straight in. So the first question, everyone has done this thing where you're standing listening to a politician, and depending on the side of the political spectrum they are, it's really difficult to agree with them if they're on the opposite side to you, and really difficult to find the things that you disagree with if they're on the side that you agree with. People found this particularly in the referendum, for example, in Britain, the Brexit referendum, where if you were pro-Remain, it was very difficult to hear anything bad about remaining. And if you were pro-Brexit, then it was very difficult to hear anything bad about leaving. What is this all about? It's actually confirmation bias, the first bias that we're going to talk about. It's the tendency to search for, interpret, focus on, and remember information in a way that conforms to one's preconceptions. I talked about the signs of the zodiac last time, and the horoscopes really rely on confirmation bias. So they rely on the fact that people will tend to see the same things, anything that comes up in a horoscope that is right and true and comes true. They will confirm that the horoscopes work, and anything that doesn't come up, they'll forget about it. They will just disregard that. We make snap decisions about things all the time. We have to in order to move forwards. But sometimes then we go off and we look for information, evidence that confirms that decision or viewpoint was right. And we don't think about the alternatives. So, for example, you might be thinking about awarding a contract to a company or to someone, and you will go looking for information to show that you have made the right decision. But sometimes you disregard any information that goes against that. Now, related to confirmation bias is something called the halo effect. I first came across this when I was working in exams. And in exams, where the halo effect works is where an examiner will mark a student's paper. And if their first answer is correct, the examiner is more likely to give the student benefit of doubt in subsequent answers. Whereas if the first answer is incorrect, then they are more likely to not give benefit of doubt going forwards. Now, where does this come in everyday life? Well, a while back, I was choosing between two providers of a particular online service I was looking at. I had a bad experience with someone who was working from one of these online services, and therefore that whole service has, in my mind, got a negative connotation. I don't want to go near that service because of this one person. It's got a negative halo effect. On the other side, once I got into, I had a really good meeting with a submissive, and he then gained a positive halo around him. And even though other people were saying to me, there's something slightly wrong about him, he retained that halo for far longer than he should have done before I ejected him from my life for causing all sorts of problems. So halo effect is something to look out for. And don't just think about the first meeting, the first information that you get about something. Always continue to update your bank of knowledge about whatever it is you're thinking about. Apophenia is the tendency to mistakenly perceive connections and meanings between unrelated things. Now, a really obvious example of this is constellations. So the stars in the sky are many millions of light years away from each other, and the stars in the constellation, if you look from any other angle, don't look like they're anything to do with each other. And yet from Earth, The ancients saw the stars and saw patterns in the stars that weren't there. People see faces everywhere. That's an example of apophenia. Now, all of that is a bit fun. Where it becomes problematic is where people start to see patterns that don't exist and things that really matter to them. So the gambler's fallacy, seeing patterns in lottery numbers, for example. I remember way back when the National Lottery started in the UK, people would say things like, oh, the number 35 hasn't come up for the last 6 weeks, so it's guaranteed to come up soon. Well, it's as guaranteed to come up this week as it was last week, and it will be for the next 52 weeks. Each number is equally likely or unlikely to come up. People see patterns in data all the time, and sometimes the data may have no pattern at all. It's just random, but we're trying to see a pattern. I saw a wonderful graph once that had an absolute straight line correlation between the number of bottles of water sold in a country and the number of Catholic priests in that country. Now, as far as I'm aware, there is no causal relationship between the number of bottles of water sold and the number of Catholic priests. However, if you were to look at that data, you'd think, oh, the one thing relates to the other. The Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster has pointed out that there is a lack of pirates in the world, and yet there's global warming. So obviously there's a pattern between the two of them, that we need to add more pirates and that will stop global warming. Obviously, these are silly examples, but we find this all the time in business, where people see a pattern that really isn't there. And you have to think, is this a pattern or is this just a random effect? The next cognitive bias that we have is something called anchoring. This is the tendency to rely heavily on one piece of information, normally the first, when making decisions. So an example of anchoring would be if you to walk into an interview and the people were going to pay between 30 and 40,000, but you didn't know that. If they said to you, oh, what is your salary expectation? And you said about 25,000, then you've anchored them low and they are more likely to give you £30,000. Whereas even if jokingly you said, oh, £100,000, you've anchored them high and they're more likely to give you £40,000. It's the reason that the car prices are set high. It's the reason that the house prices are set high. It's high anchoring. I saw brilliant anchoring once in a market where a guy was selling towels. Now, if you buy towels in market, you might want to pay, £3 or £4 per towel. This guy sold the towels and he said, I'm not going to charge you £20 for this towel. So he anchored really high. He said, I'm not going to charge you 15. I'm not going to charge you 10. I'm not even going to charge you 5. I'm going to charge you £0 for this towel if you buy a second towel for £10. So actually, he was selling each towel for £5, but he'd anchored it at 20. So you think 10 is less than 20, so you've got a good deal. The fact that you've completely forgotten the actual amount that you would normally pay for a towel, £2 or £3 or £4, is irrelevant. He's anchored you high. So that's anchoring. So watch out for it in sales. And if you are trying to sell to people, think about how you can anchor high. The sunk cost fallacy is the next fallacy. This is a sunk cost is a cost that has already been incurred and cannot be recovered. So Concorde was a great example of a sunk cost fallacy in play. So the British and French governments spent a huge amount of money on supersonic planes. But over time, it became really clear that these planes were never going to make back the money that had been spent. However, they kept pouring money into this project to try and make it better and better and try to make it work. At some point, someone should have said, no, not going to work. We need to pull the plug. But people were saying, oh, we've already spent this money. We should move forwards with it. And they didn't until Concorde was stopped for a series of other events. Where does this happen in our everyday life? Well, imagine you go to a film. Halfway through the film, you think, this is absolutely rubbish. Why am I sitting here? Then you think, well, I've sat here for the last hour. May as well keep watching the film. I've already spent the money. I've already used that time. That's sunk cost fallacy. You should be thinking, I'm here. Do I want to stay here for the next hour or not? The money's already gone. The cost is already gone. An alternative, you turn up to a theatre, you really wanted to see the show, you've paid £100 for the ticket. Would you then go to the show? You then lose the ticket, and they won't let you in. But someone standing there is willing to sell you a ticket for another £100. Now, the question is, would you buy that second ticket? If you're thinking to yourself, well, to go to the show now costs me £200, that's a sunk cost fallacy. The £100 you spent on the first ticket is gone. Would you spend £100 now on getting another ticket? That's the question you should be asking yourself. Is it worth that second £100, not the first plus the second? Where this often comes up is in relationships. People say, oh, I've been in this relationship for 10 years. I should, just continue with it. Well, no, that's a sunk cost. The first 10 years is a sunk cost. If the relationship is good to start from here going forwards, that's great. If it's not a good relationship, the amount of time you've been in the relationship is not important. Faulty generalization. So sometimes people will say to you, oh, avoid such and such an airline. I was once on there and a member of the cabin crew was really rude to me. Now that's a generalization to say that one member of the cabin crew was the same as every member of the cabin crew for that particular airline. It's not fair. You need more data. You need to see more cabin crew members to see if that is actually what's going on, or if it could be that there was bad management throughout the cabin crew, that they recruited badly and actually it was a terrible airline, or it could be that one person was having a bad day. I've heard people say to me, oh, I tried a therapist, I went to therapy and they were really judgy. That doesn't mean that every therapist is going to be judgy. So basing your generalization on one person isn't great. The last fallacy we're going to talk about today is the McNamara fallacy. McNamara was the US Secretary of Defense in the Vietnam War. Now, what he did was he thought that America was going to win the war by basing his information on data that could be measured. Things like, the amount of money that they were spending, the number of troops on the ground, and not on anything that couldn't be measured easily. Daniel Yankovic has said this. He said, the first step is to measure whatever can easily be measured. That's okay as far as it goes. The second step is to disregard that which can't easily be measured or give it an arbitrary quantitative value. That is artificial and misleading. The third step is to presume that what can't be measured isn't really important. This is blindness. The fourth step is to say that which cannot be easily measured doesn't really exist. This is suicide. Now, we've seen this in the UK in hospitals. When the hospitals are judged on the number of people who are seen in a particular time in accident and emergency, and quality of care, which is really difficult to measure, is not measured and therefore ignored. I saw it when I was working in schools, when it was all about exam results and not about change of life chances of the student. That's really difficult to measure. So people didn't. So in businesses, often we measure the things that we can measure and ignore everything that we can't. And that is something that is really, really poor. Now, I've sort of highlighted these fallacies and biases, or a number of them for you. The really important work is to then think about how they relate to you and your work. So what I would suggest you do is you download today's worksheet from my website, englishleathermaster.com/mastering-life-shorts. The password today is check bias, no space, capital C, capital B. You'll go through each of the fallacies and biases I've talked about and think, how does it relate to me and my life and my work, and how can I avoid falling into that trap in the future? Next week, we're going to be talking about communications and really thinking about how we can improve the communications in our life and in our work. I really look forward to speaking to you then. Thank you very much.